Hey everybody, as you can see, we're trying our best to bring you some worship, and we're doing this online, and we're pre-recording this part of it. So we're just here trying to find the best way we can to bring you worship. So I pray that you bring yourself into a place of worship. Thank you, Gary, for that last song where we could empty ourselves from being tied up in the world and all that's going on around us, and we'll be able to empty ourselves and present ourselves in a time of worship. So I ask that you will do that right now. Just empty what is distracting you right now and just allow yourself to continue to be in worship as we go into this time. I just want to remind you that you can send your prayer request in while I'm speaking. You can type them in the comment section. And also, there's going to be a link coming up there where you can do online giving. I know people are worried about how can I give my offerings, and so this is your opportunity to be able to do it virtually online and submit that to the church, or you can still mail it to us. But this is just your opportunity to do it from the safety of your home. So thank you for taking that into consideration. Today we're still in the book of John. And it's John 11, and it's most of that chapter. I'm not going to read it verbatim. I encourage you to get your Bible out and follow along where you can. This is about the story of Lazarus, the raising of Lazarus, a story that's well known in the Bible. And there are so many different lessons that I could teach off of this. I'm not going to hit every part. That's why I'm not reading it verbatim, because it's 40-some chapter or 40-some verses, and there's no way we could cover it all in one day, and you don't want to watch me for that long. So I'm going to pull out parts of this, but you can read along. Again, it's John chapter 11, and it's the death and resurrection of Lazarus. So it starts off with a man named Lazarus was very sick, and he's the brother of Mary and Martha. Who is this? Why is this significant? Mary and Martha and Lazarus are brothers, two sisters and a brother who lived together in a town called Bethany. And Jesus was like you might as well call him his best friend. Anytime he was in the area and needed a place to stay, he was there. They were really tight. Even in the scriptures, it says that when they talk about Lazarus getting sick, he tells them, "Lord, the one that you love is sick." And so you can see that we have this tight bond. This is not John as in the apostle, but this is John, or this is Lazarus, another one they call the one you love. So you can see that there's that tight bond. This message, this story is almost a precursor to what's happening. We're heading towards Easter. It's a preview of what's about to happen, the rising from the dead. And so this is actually the first one who's brought back in the same way that Jesus is. So that makes it very interesting. And so, as I said, that connection was the sisters sent word to Jesus in verse 3 and said, "Lord, the one you love is sick." And it goes on to say when Jesus heard this, he said, "The sickness will not end in death. No, this is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified in it." Jesus said that knowing what was going to happen. Jesus knew that he was going to allow Lazarus to die. He knew that he was going to do it for the glory of God. So this is why he was allowing this to happen. And so it says that he stayed there 2 more days. Why would he stay 2 more days? Well, because he wanted to make sure he was dead. I mean, dead. Not just passed away or sleeping, but he wanted to make sure that there was no doubt about it, that this wasn't a trick. And so then after 2 days, he waits. He says, "Now let's go back to Judea." Of course, we have a small section there where it talks about that they didn't really want to go back. But again, that's a message for later. And so they start heading towards Judea. And as he says, let's get ready to go back, he says, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep. It is time to go back. And Jesus speaks almost in a metaphor. Lazarus is sleeping now, so we need to go. And they're like, well, if he's just sleeping, why are we so worried about going back right now? Because remember, this is going to be dangerous. They wanted to stone you earlier, so why are we going back if he's just sleeping? And I really love when Jesus comes forward and just says, Lazarus is dead. You know, sometimes we need that in life, don't we? We just need Jesus to be blunt with us. Lazarus is dead, and it's time to go there. But he goes on to say, and for your sake, I'm glad I was not there, so that you may believe. The book of John is all about this. This is almost like if I had to pick one phrase in the book of John, this is what one of them would be, and that is that John wants us to know who Jesus is, and so we can believe in him. Everything that John points to is who is Jesus, and we need to believe in him. And so that's the setting of where we're at. Jesus is setting this up, and John writes it so to set up that we know what this whole story is for. So now we're going to move ahead a little bit, and the scene is set up now because we have a funeral. Lazarus has died, and it says on arrival, Jesus found Lazarus already been in the tomb for 4 days. So this is we're at the funeral now. This is already gone. He's dead. People are all gathered around. So 2 questions might come up is, one, why is 4 days so important? What's the significance of that? You see, back then, we do this today too, but there's a lot of superstitions that go around when people die. You'd be surprised what pastors hear. And I know that people will say things like, well, you know, Joe was a great golfer. He loved his golf. So when he dies, I'm sure he's up there on that long fairway just hitting them straight. And I keep thinking, no, if that's all the more heaven's going to be is a golf course. Although I love golfing, not that I'm good at it, but no, heaven's going to be so much more. So you can see that we have all these really weird belief systems that really aren't always true. And this isn't true for them also. 4 days is important because they used to believe that even though the body was dead and they buried him the same day because they didn't embalm him, so they put him in a tomb, but they believed the spirit could linger for 3 days just in case he's going to come back. Now, obviously, this wasn't true, but that was their belief. The spirit could linger over the body and over the tomb for 3 days. But on the 4th day, the body had decayed enough that there's no way the spirit was coming back, and so the spirit would leave. And so this was the important part of it being 4 days, is that he's dead. There's no doubt about it. It wasn't the spirit that was lingering. He is gone. So that's significant. The other thing I found interesting about it being 4 days is this is the only time we actually see this in the Bible. Because like in Matthew 9, when the synagogue leader comes to Jesus and begs, my daughter is dead, can you help? Or the widow's son, as they're walking along in a funeral, Jesus rises both of them. Those are on the same day that they died. And so that 4 days was important because it wasn't like all those other ones. It wasn't like, well, the spirit was lingering or maybe they were just sound asleep or something like that. The 4 days was about just making sure that there was no doubt about it. So Jesus is heading to the area, and Martha hears that Jesus is coming. And Martha goes out to meet him. And Martha comes running up to Jesus and she says, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know even now God will give you whatever you ask. Did you hear the words, the way Martha says those? I get that feeling that Martha is saying, you know, Jesus, if you would have been here, that attitude of, how dare you not come when we called for you? You could have done something. Notice that tone. Have you ever felt that way? Jesus, if you would have just, if you would have done this, this wouldn't have happened. If you would have made this happen, or if you would have moved that car, if you would have taken that illness away, if you would have, I've done that. I'm sure you have too. But then the word in the scripture says, but I know even now God will give you whatever you ask. So she's really upset with Jesus, but yet on the other hand, she's still trying to be faithful. Like I said, I've been there and I'm sure you have been too. I want to be faithful, God, but man, this is tough. Jesus responds to her, your brother will rise again. And Martha answered, I know he will rise again in the resurrection at that last day. See, Martha's trying. She's trying to show her faith. She's hurt. She's crushed. You know, it's, again, I feel for her because she wants to so bad believe and be that super Christian, but yet she hurts and it's a struggle. Then we have some of the greatest words from Jesus. Jesus says to her, I am the resurrection and the life. You know that resurrection you're talking about? I'm it. You're talking about he will rise sometime. I'm the one who does the raising. I'm the one who gives you that life again. This is the fifth I am statement in the scriptures. He says, I am the resurrection and the life. Claiming just not that the I am statement, but the I am statement that I am God. I am the Son of God. I am the one who brings life. I am the one who I'm in control. Then he says to her, do you believe this? And again, she says, yes, Lord. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world. I think she's seeing a little bit of hope there. You know, Jesus is, sometimes we need to talk down off the ledge. You know, we're so upset at God or we're so upset at the situation, and then we need to be talked down sometimes. Martha, you know who I am. You're saying I'm the Messiah. It's going to be okay. She's starting to find a little bit of hope in that. So then, after she's kind of talked down, she goes back and she gets Mary and says, Mary, the teacher is looking for you. And so she goes running out to meet Jesus. Jesus has never actually entered the town. And now it says that when the Jews who had been with Mary in the house, comforting her, noticed her get up quickly and go out, that they thought she was going back to the tomb to mourn again. Just a word on the mourning, the way they did it. It was a long, drawn-out event. The first week after somebody died, they were buried on the same day they died, but it was like all-out wailing for a week. I mean, even to the point that they would pay people to come in and wail and cry and carry on. It was a loud thing. You know, when we go to a funeral home, it's so quiet. Everyone whispers, proper voices. Their funerals were totally different. Even if they were walking through the streets with the person who died, they were yelling and screaming and carrying on, and you knew that something was happening. And if you didn't know your neighbor died, you would know real soon because you were going to hear the sound. And for a week, they would put ash on their head and wear sackcloth. And if you went to their door, they would look ragged. I mean, they were all out in tears mourning. Now, even they went beyond that. It actually went a full month, but that first week was just all out. So they were with Mary in a time when she was in that deep mourning. This is the day 4. They still have 3 days to go yet in this process. So they're going to follow her wherever she's going to go. She's going to go out to the tomb and cry. We're going to go with her, and we're going to keep wailing with her. So Mary actually goes out and meets Jesus, and she runs up to him, and it says that she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Do you notice the difference between her and Martha? Martha was that bold, how dare you not be here? Mary's still saying, I'm being faithful. I know if you would have been here, something would have happened. And I want to worship you. Notice that every time Mary meets Jesus, she always seems to be at his feet. It's worship. It's a moment of being able to praise Jesus. And even in her hurt and her pain, she's trying to worship Jesus. But yet at the same time, she's in pain. She hurts. She lost her dear brother. So she's trying to be faithful and say, if you had been here, I know it would have been different because I have faith in you. See, Jesus knew what he was going to do, but they didn't. And they believed in Jesus, but they couldn't see what was going to happen yet. It was something new. When Jesus saw her weeping, it says, and the Jews who came along, those who were weeping, Jesus was deeply moved in spirit and troubled and asked, "Where did you lay him?" A lot of times when we think about this, we think that deeply moved means sad. You know, he was sad with them. But really, it's more of a deeply moved in spirit is more like angry. You know, it's almost like when somebody goes, "Argh," a big long, "Argh." What would Jesus be angry about? Because of sin. Why did Lazarus die? Not because of the disease, but because of sin. The original sin brought death to humanity. He's mad at sin. God did not plan for us to live this way. God did not want disease. God did not create this. This is all because of the original sin, and he's angry at the sin and at death and the pain that humanity has to go through. And then he says, "Where have you taken him?" And they say, "Come, Lord, and we'll show you." And then one of the shortest verses in the scriptures, and one of the most powerful ones, it says, Jesus wept. Jesus cried. Why? Jesus knew that he was going to raise him from the dead. He knew what was going to happen. It's the human side of Jesus. See, we need to see this part of it. We need, as we know that he's going to do this miracle, this sign of who he is, we need to see the human side of Jesus. Because remember, he's fully human along with being fully divine. And so that human side, he allowed himself to experience the emotions of Mary and Martha and those who are around. And that's important for us because it allows us to know that Jesus feels and knows what we're experiencing. You could say, Jesus tells me to have faith, but he never had to go through. Yes, he's had experience with those emotions. And that's important. A God who's walking with you knows what it feels like to lose a loved one, knows what it is to be in pain. Then they said, Jesus, when the Jews saw this, see how they loved him? But some of them said, could not the one who opened the eyes of a blind man have kept this man from dying? They said, sure, he loved him, but he could have. Did he really love him? I mean, if you think about it, if he really loved him, he wouldn't have let him die. Again, they didn't know what Jesus had in mind, but they're almost like the kids when you're at home. And I'm sure right now as you're at home with your kids stuck in there, some of you heard the words, "You really don't love me, Mom and Dad, because you didn't let me do whatever, or you made me, hey, there's no school. Why am I doing schoolwork at home? What do you mean homeschooling? Why is it that I can't go out and play? Why can't I eat that? You don't love me." I'm sure many parents have heard, if not all parents have at some point in time have heard that from their kid, right? You don't love me. But we know as parents that what we're doing is out of love. We stop you from doing that. We tell you to do that, or whatever we do, we're doing it because we love you, not because we're being mean, but because we do love you. It's all about the timing. See, Jesus knows the timing and the reason for what's going on here. God's timing is perfect. Ours is screwed up a lot of times. But the reason why all this was happening was that we could learn who Jesus was and what he could do. Timing is perfect. So Jesus then goes to the tomb and says, roll away the stone. By this time, Martha says, there's a bad odor, for he's been in there 4 days. You can imagine being in the Middle East where it's really hot. I've been there in the middle of the day. 110 is not uncommon. Think of a corpse in that heat. I know some of you may still like to read the King James Version of the Bible, and you probably get pushback, but I'll tell you what, the King James says it the best when Martha says, "But Lord, he stinketh." You know, and that pretty much puts it right where it's at, right? This is not going to be pretty, Jesus. You realize he's been there 4 days. I mean, to them, it's ridiculous. Jesus' response was, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" Again, believe in me, watch me, and the timing of this is so important. So it says that they took away the stone. The stones that they had to move away were heavy. They were like a ton. It would take several people to do this. So there wasn't grave robbers and animals couldn't get in there. It was really tough to move that stone. So it had been a lot of work to do this. But Jesus has them move the stone. And then he looks up in the sky and he says a prayer. "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I know that you always hear me. But I say this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." You see, everything Jesus does from here now is very loudly spoken. I mean, he doesn't need to speak loud. We don't have to be loud when we talk to God. But he does it, again, so people can learn. Back then, the wizards and those who did witchcraft, when they did their spells and that, they would speak softly. They would almost mumble. And Jesus is showing them, this is not of a wizard. This is not of anything like that. This is of God. I'm pointing you to God, and I want you to know that this is God. I want you to hear this. And then he turns around and he says, "Lazarus, come out," calling him. Some people have said that, I think it's funny because they said, well, why did he call him by name? And you could really get into sort of deep metaphors, you know, he calls us by name, right? And we like to think about that. But also, this was probably a family tomb, and if he would have just said, "Come out," how many people might have come out? We don't know. There could have been other people in there, if you would understand how the tombs worked then. But he points to Lazarus, and he says, "Lazarus, come out." And it says that Lazarus came out, and his hands and feet were wrapped with strips of linen, and there was a cloth around his face. And Jesus said, "Take off those grave clothes and let him go." Isn't that what we want to feel? Jesus said, "I am the resurrection and the life." He's the one who can release us from that bondage, the bondage of death, the bondage of death from sin. Remember, sin is what causes the death. And Jesus is the one who can overcome death. That means he overcomes sin. And he's the one who can set us free, just not from death to sin, but from all those things that bind you, all those things that hold you down, all the things you're going through right now. I pray this week that when you feel like you're angry at God, that you feel like you're bound up, that if you're crossing your arms or questioning what God is doing, remember God's timing is going to be perfect. He is that parent, that father who loves us, even when we don't always understand it. But the reason behind all of it is so we can know who he is, and so that we can see what God can do. I encourage you this week to take off the linens that bind you. And as Gary sang, pour more of God into you. Be less focused on yourself. I pray that in this time, you will experience that freedom from the bondage that has you held so tight. And I pray this in the name of Christ Jesus. Amen.